Hey everyone, and welcome. Learning to read can feel like pure magic, but it's not magic at all. It's actually a puzzle, and a solvable one at that. So today, we're going to dive into the science behind how kids crack the code of written language, turning all those funny little symbols on a page into incredible stories and ideas. So let's start with a big question. Why isn't reading as natural as talking? I mean, we just pick up speech, right? But reading? That's a whole different beast. It's a human invention and a pretty recent one in the grand scheme of things. Think about it. No kid in history has ever learned to read just by being left alone in a library. It takes direct instruction, a ton of practice, and lots of experience with print to literally build those reading pathways in the brain. For the longest time, there was this popular idea that reading problems were all about vision. The thinking went something like this. Kids struggle because their eyes jump all over the page. And if you could just train their eyes to move correctly, poof, problem solved. Well, modern research has completely flipped that idea on its head, and this is absolutely crucial. Those erratic eye movements, they aren't the cause of poor reading at all. They're a symptom. The real issue is much deeper, in something called phonological processing. It's all about how our brain tunes into the sound structure of language, its ability to hear, identify, and even play with the individual sounds or phonemes that make up the words we speak every day. All right, so here's a roadmap for piecing this all together. We're going to start with the surprising power of rhyme, and then we'll move on to cracking the sound code of language. From there, we'll look at the best ways to actually teach the brain to read, get into what happens when reading is a struggle, and finally, we'll talk about the support systems that can make all the difference. Let's kick things off with something we all know and probably grew up with, nursery rhymes. It turns out that all that early playtime with language, Humpty Dumpty, Twinkle Twinkle, it actually provides the very first clues a child needs to solve the reading puzzle. And this all feeds into what's known as the causal connection theory. It basically says there are three critical links for learning to read. First, a little kid's awareness of rhyme is a huge predictor of how well they'll read later on. Second, if you explicitly teach them about the smallest sounds and words, you build their phonemic awareness. And third, reading and spelling, they're not a one-way street. They help each other grow in this powerful back-and-forth relationship. So, how exactly does rhyme work its magic? Well, it introduces kids to a fundamental idea. Words can be broken into sound parts. And for a kid, the most natural first step is to split a word like cat into its onset, that's the first sound, the k, and its rhyme, which is the at part that follows. That's a whole lot easier for a young brain to handle than breaking it down into every single little sound. And this is where that skill becomes a superpower. Once a child gets the hang of onset rhyme, they can start using this really powerful tool, analogy. So say they learn to read the word shop. They start to see that op rhyme as a chunk, and then they can use that pattern to figure out a whole family of new words, like drop, mop, and pop. It's an incredibly smart and efficient way to expand their reading world. Okay, so onset rhyme is a huge first step, right? But to really, truly master reading, we've got to get even more granular. We need to go from those bigger sound chunks to the absolute smallest building blocks of our language, the individual phonemes. Just take a look at this. On the left, splitting the word sun into its onset rhyme is pretty straightforward, s and un. But to really read an alphabetic language like ours, a child needs to do what's on the right. They have to hear each tiny sound. S, n. This skill, called phonemic segmentation, is the key that unlocks the whole alphabetic code. Without it, matching letters to sounds is just a guessing game. So, how do we even know if a kid has this skill? Well, researchers have some pretty clever ways to test for it. They might ask a child to tap out the sounds in a word, so cat would be 3 taps. Or they might try phoneme deletion, asking what word is left if you say bus without the bus sound. Performance on these little language games is one of the single strongest predictors of how well a child will learn to read. All right, so we've got all this theory. We know rhyme is important, we know phonemic awareness is critical, but what does this actually look like in the real world? How should we be teaching reading to kids in the classroom? And this is where we get into a pretty big debate in education about the best way to teach phonics. For years, people argued about different methods, but honestly, after decades of research, the evidence is now pretty darn clear. A systematic, synthetic phonics approach, where you teach sounds first and then how to blend them into words, is one of the most effective ways to get kids reading. But wait, there's a huge piece of the puzzle here. It's not just about teaching phonics, it's about how you teach it. The real breakthrough comes when you explicitly connect that sound awareness directly to letters on the page. We're talking about teaching the p sound and then immediately having a child read and write words like pat, pin, pan. You have to make that link between sound and symbol direct and meaningful. A classic study from 1994 really put this to the test. They took struggling 7-year-old readers and split them into groups. One group got only the phonological sound training, another group got only reading practice, and the third group, they got both. But critically, the sound training was explicitly linked to their reading and writing. The big question was, which one would work? And the results? Whoa, they were crystal clear. Only the group that got the phonological training linked with reading showed real significant progress. This was a huge finding. It proved that just teaching sound skills in a vacuum isn't enough. Why? Because that integration, that linkage, is what actually builds the strong, fast connections in the brain between what a child hears and what they see. It's that combination that unlocks everything. So what about the kids who still struggle, even when they get good instruction? Well, this brings us to the important topic of developmental dyslexia, which affects more people than you might think. Okay, first things first. We need to distinguish between two types. There's acquired dyslexia, which is when an adult who could read loses that ability after some kind of brain injury. But what we're focusing on here is developmental dyslexia. That's when someone has difficulty learning to read right from the start. And more often than not, it links right back to those core phonological processing skills we've been talking about. To really get our heads around this, it helps to think of the reading brain as a busy network. Reading isn't just one thing, it's a bunch of systems all coordinating at lightning speed. You've got orthography, what the letters look like, you've got phonology, what they sound like, and you have semantics, what the word actually means. In dyslexia, the connections between these systems, especially between the visual look of a word and its sound, can be a bit less efficient. This makes the whole process of decoding slow, difficult, and tiring. Of course, learning to read doesn't happen in a vacuum. It really does take a village. The support system that parents and teachers create is absolutely vital for a child's journey into literacy. And check this out. A study on ebooks found something so telling. They had 4 different groups, but reading skills only improved in the 3 groups where an adult was actively guiding the child's attention to the words and the sounds. This is so powerful. It shows us that just being exposed to stories isn't the magic bullet. The real progress happens when we make reading interactive, when we point to the words and connect what a child is seeing to what they're hearing. Which brings us to our final and I think most important question. The science of reading has given us a clear roadmap. We know the key ingredients, we know what works, and we know what doesn't. So what do we do with all this? How can we take everything we now know and build a system where every Ingle child gets the chance to crack the code and unlock the magic of reading for themselves? So there you have it. The path to literacy is actually pretty clear, isn't it? It starts with the playful sounds of rhyme. It builds to a deep understanding of the individual sounds of our language, and it all comes together with smart, systematic teaching that links sounds to letters. The research gives us the tools we need to solve this puzzle for every child. And that's a challenge we can and absolutely must meet. Thanks so much for digging into this with us.